Have you felt that deep anxiety in your heart when thinking about eternity? Perhaps you've lost someone dear and find yourself tormented by questions you can't answer. Where is their soul now? Are they suffering? Are they at peace? Can I still help them somehow? Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more teachings and spiritual guidance from Saint Faustina. Tonight, I want to share with you one of the most profound and transformative revelations that heaven has ever given to humanity. Saint Faustina Kowalska, the Secretary of Divine Mercy, received from Christ himself detailed visions of what happens to souls after death. These aren't human opinions or theological theories. These are direct revelations from Jesus, documented in her official diary, examined by the Church, and recognized as authentic mystical experiences. What you're about to discover will forever change how you see death, how you live each day, and how you prepare for eternity. Because Saint Faustina didn't just see the destinations of souls, she witnessed the exact moment of judgment. She spoke with souls in purgatory. She contemplated the glory of heaven, and yes, she even descended into the depths of hell guided by an angel. Can you imagine the impact these visions had on her heart? How would you feel if Christ himself showed you the eternal destiny that awaits every human soul? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this scene with me. You're lying on your deathbed, and suddenly you feel your soul separating from your body. What do you think happens in that exact instant? Is there darkness? Is there light? Is there fear? Or is there peace? Saint Faustina was privileged to receive revelations about this crucial moment, and what Christ showed her will leave you breathless. In her diary, Saint Faustina wrote that Jesus revealed to her how, at the moment of death, every soul faces immediate judgment. Not a judgment delayed for the end of times, but an instant encounter with Christ the Judge. Can you imagine that moment? Your entire life passing before the eyes of Jesus, every thought, every word, every action weighed in the balance of divine justice and mercy. Saint Faustina saw how some souls approached this moment with confidence, while others trembled with terror. What makes the difference? What determines whether a soul faces this encounter with peace or with anguish? Christ told Saint Faustina something that should make us all reflect deeply. The soul that trusts in my mercy is the happiest. These aren't just beautiful words. They're the key to understanding how divine judgment works. When a soul has lived trusting in the mercy of Jesus, cultivating that trust through prayer, sacraments, and acts of love, death becomes not an enemy, but a doorway to glory. But when a soul has lived in pride, in sin, refusing grace and mercy, that same moment becomes the beginning of its eternal torment. Have you ever thought about which category your soul would fall into if death surprised you today? The most striking thing that Saint Faustina learned is that God doesn't condemn souls. Souls condemn themselves. In her vision of hell, she discovered that most of the souls there are those who did not believe that hell exists. Do you realize the terrible irony? The very act of denying eternal reality is what leads to experiencing it in its most painful form. Christ doesn't force anyone into hell. Hell is the final choice of souls who prefer their pride to his mercy. But here's the hope that should fill your heart. Until the last moment, until the final breath, God's mercy is available. The question is, are you willing to trust in that mercy, or will pride keep you from the embrace that could save your soul? What do you imagine when you think of Jesus as judge? Perhaps a severe figure, inflexible, ready to condemn. Saint Faustina discovered something completely different, something that transformed her understanding of divine justice forever. In her mystical encounters with Christ, she learned that he who will judge us is the same one who died for us on the cross. Can you grasp the profound truth of this reality? Jesus revealed to Saint Faustina that his mercy is greater than all human misery. He told her directly, "My mercy is greater than your wretchedness and that of the whole world. Who has measured my goodness? For you I descended from heaven to earth. For you I allowed myself to be nailed to the cross. For you I permitted my sacred heart to be opened with a lance, and opened for you a fountain of mercy." These aren't the words of a harsh judge, but of a lover who gave everything for the salvation of souls. When you hear these words, what do you feel in your heart? Can you sense the infinite love that pulsates in each syllable? But here's what Saint Faustina learned that should both console and challenge you. God's mercy, though infinite, requires a response from the human soul. It's not an automatic salvation that ignores human freedom. Christ told her, "I cannot help a soul which does not trust in me and does not take advantage of my graces." Do you see the beautiful and terrible responsibility we have? God offers mercy, but we must open our hearts to receive it. We must choose to trust instead of doubting, to humble ourselves instead of remaining proud, to confess instead of hiding our sins. Saint Faustina also received the revelation that there are souls who, even when facing divine mercy, choose to reject it. In one of her visions, she saw how some souls, even at the moment of death, turned their backs on the light of Christ and chose the darkness of separation from God. This wasn't because God abandoned them, but because they preferred their sin to His grace. Have you ever wondered why someone would make such a choice? It's because pride can become so rooted in the human heart that the soul prefers to be right in its rebellion than to be saved by grace. This should make us examine our own hearts. Are there areas where pride prevents us from fully surrendering to God's mercy? Now comes the moment when we must face the complete truth about eternal destiny. Saint Faustina, through her mystical visions, was shown the 3 possible destinations for every human soul after death, not as distant theological concepts, but as real places that she visited, where she spoke with souls and witnessed their states. Are you prepared to hear what she discovered? Are you ready to understand where your own soul might be heading? The first destination Saint Faustina was shown was heaven. In her diary, she describes it as a happiness so great that it cannot be described. But it wasn't just the absence of suffering that impressed her, it was the overwhelming presence of love. She saw how souls in heaven don't just enjoy their own happiness, but rejoice in the happiness of all others. It's a communion of love so perfect that each soul's joy multiplies the joy of all. When you think about heaven, is this what you imagine? A place where love is so complete that there's no room for envy, competition, or sadness? Saint Faustina saw that the souls there had one thing in common: they had trusted completely in God's mercy during their earthly life. The second destination was Purgatory, and here Saint Faustina received revelations that should move every Catholic heart. She was guided by her guardian angel to a misty place full of fire, and in it a multitude of suffering souls. These souls pray with great fervor, but ineffectively for themselves. Only we can help them. Can you imagine the anguish of these souls? They are saved, yes, but they must be purified before entering heaven. Saint Faustina learned that these souls suffer silently but with immense hope because they know their suffering has an end, and that end is eternal glory. What she discovered that should inspire you is that our prayers on earth can bring them immense relief and even liberation. If you feel moved by these revelations and want to help souls in purgatory, write in the comments, "I pray for the souls in purgatory," and subscribe to the channel by clicking the bell so you receive more spiritual teachings that can transform your eternity. The third destination was hell, and here Saint Faustina received one of the most impactful visions recorded in Christian mysticism. Guided by an angel, she descended into the abysses of hell. It is a place of great torment. How extraordinarily extensive it is. But what shocked her most wasn't the physical suffering, but the spiritual reality. I noticed one thing, that most of the souls there are those who did not believe that hell exists. The tragic irony should make us all tremble. Souls are in hell partly because they refuse to believe in its reality. They lived as if their choices had no eternal consequences, and now they face those consequences forever. But even in this terrifying vision, Saint Faustina learned something that should fill us with hope and urgency. Hell is not God's desire for any soul. Jesus told her, "I send you to all humanity with my mercy. I do not want to punish the aching humanity, but I desire to heal it, to embrace it to my merciful heart." This means that every soul you encounter, every person you meet, every sinner you see, still has the opportunity for salvation. The question that should burn in your heart is, what am I doing to help souls avoid this eternal tragedy? How am I living and sharing the mercy that could save them? Have you ever tried to imagine what it would be like to see God face to face? Saint Faustina was granted glimpses of heavenly glory that left her so transformed she could barely return to earthly concerns. What she saw there should ignite in your heart a burning desire to live every moment of your life oriented toward that eternal destiny. Are you ready to understand what awaits souls who trust completely in divine mercy? In her mystical experiences, Saint Faustina described heaven not as a place of golden streets or precious stones, but as a state of perfect love. She wrote, "What I experienced and saw, I cannot describe, but I know that all the description I might give would be but a pale shadow of what I actually saw. The glory of heaven isn't just about the absence of suffering, it's about the overwhelming presence of God. Imagine your heart so filled with love that there's no room for any sadness, fear, or want. Imagine knowing with absolute certainty that you are completely loved, completely accepted, completely home. This is what Saint Faustina glimpsed, and it left her with such longing that earthly life seemed like a shadow. What particularly moved Saint Faustina was discovering that in heaven, souls don't just enjoy their own happiness. They rejoice in the happiness of all others. There's no envy, no competition, no feeling that someone else's joy diminishes your own. Instead, love is so perfect that each soul's happiness multiplies the happiness of all. Can you imagine such a state? A place where your greatest joy comes not from what you receive, but from the love you can give and the love you see others receiving. This is the communion of saints in its fullest expression. And Saint Faustina saw that souls prepare for this reality by learning to love selflessly here on earth. But here's what should both comfort and challenge you. Saint Faustina learned that the souls in heaven had one thing in common during their earthly life. They had trusted completely in God's mercy. They weren't necessarily the most outwardly religious or the most visibly successful in worldly terms. They were souls who, when faced with their own sinfulness and weakness, had thrown themselves completely into the arms of divine mercy. They had lived the prayer that Saint Faustina made famous: Jesus, I trust in you. This trust wasn't just an intellectual belief, but a lived reality that shaped every decision, every response to suffering, every moment of their existence. The most beautiful thing Saint Faustina discovered about heaven is that it begins here on earth for souls who live in union with God. She experienced moments of such profound communion with Christ that she felt she was already tasting eternal life. This should give you immense hope. You don't have to wait until death to begin experiencing the joy of heaven. Every time you trust in God's mercy, every time you choose love over selfishness, every time you surrender your will to His, you're already participating in the life of heaven. The question that should burn in your heart is, am I living in a way that's preparing me for this eternal glory? Am I cultivating the trust and love that will allow me to enter this perfect communion? What if I told you that right now, as we speak, there are souls who died in God's grace but are experiencing intense suffering because they still need purification before entering heaven? Saint Faustina was given extraordinary access to the state of these souls, and what she learned should move every Christian heart to immediate action. Are you prepared to understand the reality of purgatory through the eyes of someone who actually visited it? Saint Faustina's first encounter with souls in purgatory came through a vision where her guardian angel guided her to a misty place full of fire, and in it a multitude of suffering souls. But what struck her immediately wasn't just their suffering, it was their hope. These souls, she realized, were certain of their salvation, but needed to be purified before they could enter the perfect love of heaven. Can you imagine that mixture of suffering and hope? They know they will see God, but they must first be cleansed of every attachment to sin, every imperfection that would prevent them from fully receiving divine love. What Saint Faustina discovered that should deeply move you is that these souls pray with great fervor but ineffectively for themselves. Only we can help them. Do you understand the profound responsibility this places on every living Catholic? These souls, who can no longer merit anything for themselves, depend entirely on our prayers, sacrifices, and masses offered for their relief. Saint Faustina learned that a single mass offered for a soul in purgatory can bring more relief than years of their own suffering. When you attend Mass, do you remember to offer it for these forgotten souls? When you pray the Rosary, do you think of souls who are longing for your intercession? One of the most moving revelations Saint Faustina received was seeing how souls in purgatory suffer from two types of pain: the pain of loss, being separated from the vision of God, and the pain of sense, the purifying fire that cleanses their attachments. But what she learned that should both comfort and motivate you is that these souls suffer with perfect resignation because they understand the justice and love behind their purification. They wouldn't want to enter heaven unpurified because they know that any remaining selfishness or attachment would prevent them from fully enjoying the perfect love that awaits them. But here's what should fill you with both urgency and hope. Saint Faustina learned that the prayers and sacrifices of the living can dramatically shorten the time souls spend in purgatory. She was shown how a simple prayer, a small sacrifice, even the offering of daily struggles, could bring immense relief to these souls. More powerfully, she learned that souls released from purgatory through our prayers become our most grateful intercessors in heaven. Have you ever thought about how many souls might be praying for you right now because someone, perhaps generations ago, offered prayers for their release? This is the beautiful mystery of the communion of saints, and Saint Faustina experienced it as a living reality that should transform how we think about death and prayer. Are you prepared to face one of the most difficult truths that Saint Faustina was shown? In her mystical experiences, she was given a vision of hell that was so terrible she wrote, What I saw was so awful that I would have died of terror if I had not been sustained by the power of God. But why did Christ show her this horrible reality? Because, as she learned, love sometimes must warn about consequences. If you truly love someone, don't you warn them when they're walking toward a cliff? Saint Faustina described being conducted by an angel into the abysses of hell. It is a place of great torment. How extraordinarily extensive it is. But what struck her most powerfully wasn't the physical descriptions of fire and suffering. It was the spiritual reality of total separation from God. She saw souls who had chosen, definitively and finally, to reject God's mercy. These weren't souls who had committed one terrible sin, but souls who had lived and died in a state of fundamental rebellion against love itself. Can you imagine the tragedy of a soul that prefers its own will to God's love, even when that choice leads to eternal suffering? The revelation that should shake every soul to its core is what Christ told Saint Faustina about why souls are in hell. I noticed one thing, that most of the souls there are those who did not believe that hell exists. Do you see the terrible irony? The very refusal to believe in eternal consequences is part of what leads to experiencing them. These souls lived as if their choices didn't matter eternally, as if sin had no lasting effects, as if God's warnings were empty threats. They died as they lived, refusing to take spiritual reality seriously. Are you taking spiritual reality seriously? Are you living as if your choices have eternal consequences? But even in this terrifying vision, Saint Faustina learned something that should fill us with both urgency and hope. Hell is not God's desire for any soul. Before showing her hell, Christ told her, "I send you to all humanity with my mercy. I do not want to punish the aching humanity, but I desire to heal it, to embrace it to my merciful heart." This means that every soul you encounter today still has the opportunity for salvation. Every person who seems lost in sin still has access to the mercy that could save them. The souls Saint Faustina saw in hell were there not because God abandoned them, but because they ultimately chose to abandon God. This should ignite in your heart both a holy fear for your own soul and a burning desire to help others avoid this eternal tragedy. What should move you most deeply is that Saint Faustina was shown hell not to terrify, but to motivate. Christ wants souls to understand the reality of eternal loss, so they will choose eternal gain. He wants us to see the consequences of rejecting mercy, so we will embrace mercy. Every time you're tempted to sin, remember what Saint Faustina saw. Every time you encounter someone living in serious sin, remember that they're walking toward the abyss she witnessed. The question that should burn in your heart is, what am I doing to help souls avoid this fate? How am I living and sharing the mercy that could save them from eternal loss? Have you ever wondered if your prayers really make a difference in eternity? Saint Faustina learned something that should revolutionize how you think about every rosary you pray, every mass you attend, every small sacrifice you offer. She discovered that our earthly prayers have the power to dramatically alter the eternal destiny and condition of souls. Are you ready to understand the incredible spiritual power that rests in your hands? Through her mystical experiences, Saint Faustina learned that prayer creates a bridge between earth and eternity. When she prayed for souls in purgatory, she could actually see the relief her prayers brought them. Christ showed her how a single mass offered for a suffering soul could bring more comfort than years of their own purification. Imagine the joy of a soul in purgatory suddenly feeling the cooling balm of your prayer in the midst of their purifying fire. Saint Faustina saw how these souls, unable to help themselves, depend entirely on our intercession. When you pray for the deceased, you're not just saying nice words, you're participating in their liberation. But Saint Faustina's revelations about prayer go even deeper. Christ taught her that prayers for sinners can actually prevent souls from going to hell. She received the revelation that her sufferings and prayers were instrumental in the conversion of many souls who would have otherwise been lost forever. Can you imagine the power of this reality? Your prayers today might be the grace that touches a hardened heart tomorrow. Your sacrifice this morning might be the mercy that saves a soul from eternal damnation this evening. Jesus told Saint Faustina, "By your prayers and sacrifices, you save more souls than a missionary by his teachings and sermons." What should fill you with both awe and responsibility is Saint Faustina's discovery that souls we help through our prayers become our most powerful intercessors in heaven. She learned that souls released from purgatory through our prayers never forget their benefactors. They spend eternity praying for those who helped them in their time of need. This creates a beautiful cycle. Your prayers help souls reach heaven, and those souls then pray for your salvation and sanctification. Can you see how the communion of saints becomes a living reality when you take seriously your role as an intercessor? The most practical revelation Saint Faustina received about prayer was the power of the chaplet of divine mercy for dying souls. Christ promised her, "When they say this chaplet in the presence of the dying, I will stand between my Father and the dying person, not as the just judge but as the merciful Savior." Think about the incredible promise contained in these words. Every time you pray the chaplet for someone who is dying, you're invoking Christ's mercy at the most crucial moment of their existence. Have you ever considered keeping a list of people who are seriously ill or elderly and praying the chaplet regularly for their eternal salvation? This could be the most important work you ever do, helping souls cross safely into eternity through the power of prayer. What if I told you that every time you approach the sacrament of confession or receive Holy Communion, you're directly affecting your eternal destiny? Saint Faustina received revelations about the sacraments that should transform how you think about every visit to the confessional and every reception of the Eucharist. These aren't just religious rituals, they're doorways to mercy that can determine where you spend eternity. Christ revealed to Saint Faustina that the sacrament of confession is the most direct path to his mercy. He told her, "When you go to confession, to this fountain of my mercy, the blood and water which came forth from my heart always flows down upon your soul and ennobles it." But here's what should move you deeply. Saint Faustina learned that many souls lose their salvation simply because they refuse to confess their sins with humility and sorrow. Pride keeps them from the very sacrament that could save them. When was the last time you made a thorough confession? Are there sins you've been hiding from God because of shame or pride? The Eucharist, Saint Faustina discovered, is the source of all strength for the soul's journey toward eternity. She wrote, "All the good that is in me comes from Holy Communion. I owe everything to it. I feel that this sacred fire has completely transformed me." But Christ also showed her how many souls receive communion unworthily, without proper preparation or reverence. He told her, "I receive more grief from the souls that receive me unworthily than from those who commit the greatest sins." This should make you examine your heart before every Mass. Are you receiving Jesus with the love and reverence he deserves? What Saint Faustina learned that should revolutionize your understanding is that the sacraments aren't just personal benefits, they affect the entire mystical body of Christ. When you receive the sacraments worthily, you not only purify your own soul, but also bring grace to the whole Church, including souls in purgatory. When you receive them unworthily, or neglect them altogether, you not only harm your own soul, but also deprive the mystical body of graces it needs. Can you see how your sacramental life affects not just your own eternity, but the eternal welfare of countless other souls? The most powerful revelation Saint Faustina received about the sacraments is their connection to the moment of death. Christ showed her that souls who have lived a sacramental life, regularly confessing and receiving communion with devotion, face death with confidence because they have built a relationship with divine mercy throughout their earthly life. But souls who have neglected the sacraments face death with terror because they have no familiarity with the mercy they suddenly need. The sacraments are like a bridge you build throughout your life to cross safely into eternity. Are you building that bridge with each confession and communion, or are you leaving it until the last moment when it might be too late? How would your life change if you truly believed that everything you do today has eternal consequences? Saint Faustina lived with such a vivid awareness of eternity that every moment became an opportunity to either gain or lose grace. Her mystical visions of heaven, purgatory, and hell weren't just experiences she remembered. They were realities that shaped every decision, every word, every thought. Are you ready to learn how to live with the same eternal perspective? Saint Faustina discovered that the key to living with eternity in view is developing what she called continuous prayer. Not necessarily saying prayers all the time, but maintaining an awareness of God's presence and mercy throughout every activity. She learned that even the most ordinary tasks could become acts of love that merit eternal reward. When you wash dishes, when you work at your job, when you interact with difficult people, you can offer these moments to God as prayers for souls. Saint Faustina saw how these small offerings of daily life could actually rescue souls from purgatory and even prevent souls from going to hell. What should transform your daily routine is Saint Faustina's revelation about the power of suffering offered with love. Christ showed her that voluntary sacrifices and patient acceptance of involuntary sufferings could obtain massive graces for the salvation of souls. Every headache you offer to God, every moment of fatigue you unite to Christ's passion, every disappointment you accept with trust, becomes a prayer that echoes in eternity. Saint Faustina learned that souls in heaven were constantly thanking God for people on earth whose hidden sufferings had helped secure their salvation. The most practical way Saint Faustina learned to live with eternity in view was through the practice of the 3 o'clock prayer. Christ told her, "At 3 o'clock, implore my mercy, especially for sinners, and if only for a brief moment, immerse yourself in my passion, particularly in my abandonment at the moment of agony." This daily practice connected her to the exact moment when Christ won mercy for all souls. By stopping at 3 p.m. each day to pray for souls, you're participating in the very work of salvation. Are you willing to set an alarm to remind yourself to pray at this holy hour? But perhaps the most transformative aspect of living with eternity in view is how it changes your relationships with others. Saint Faustina saw every person she met as a soul destined for either eternal glory or eternal loss. This made her treat everyone with immense compassion and urgency. She couldn't be indifferent to anyone because she knew their eternal destiny hung in the balance. Can you imagine how different your interactions would be if you truly saw every person as someone whose soul you might help save or lose? Every act of kindness becomes an opportunity to reflect God's mercy. Every harsh word becomes a potential obstacle to someone's salvation. When you live with eternity in view, there are no unimportant moments and no unimportant people. We've reached the moment of ultimate truth, the moment when everything we've discovered together about the eternal destiny of souls becomes personal for you. Saint Faustina's revelations weren't given just to inform us about what happens after death. They were given to help us make the right choices while we still have time. Right now, in this very moment, you are shaping your eternal destiny. The question that should burn in your heart is, what choice are you making? Standing before you are the same 3 paths that Saint Faustina saw in her visions. There's the path to heaven, reserved for souls who trust completely in divine mercy and live that trust through love of God and neighbor. There's the path through purgatory, for souls who die in God's grace, but still need purification from attachments to sin. And there's the path to hell, chosen by souls who ultimately reject God's mercy and prefer their own will to His love. Which path are you currently walking? More importantly, which path do you choose to walk from this moment forward? The beautiful truth that Saint Faustina learned is that it's never too late to change paths while you're still alive. Christ told her, even if a soul were like a decaying corpse, and humanly there were no hope of restoration, all would not be lost. The miracle of divine mercy restores that soul in full. No matter what sins burden your conscience, no matter how far you feel from God, no matter how many times you've failed, divine mercy is still available to you. And this is